if you see yourself as part of everyone and everything, then that's the end of suffering. That's the end of conflict. But if you think that you're something other than what you truly are, you're always going to suffer in some way, shape, or form.
Firstly, I wanted to bring in this little guy because I was doing some research on, obviously, on you, and then you mentioned this book, and I know you don't really read much. So yeah, talk to me about this first of all, because I can't get through it. The first chapter. Anyone listening is Istak Bentoff's Stalking the Wild Pendulum.
Yeah, so Stalking the Wild Pendulum, the author offers a bridge between Eastern mysticism and more modern science, quantum physics. So if you can get through the first four chapters, he goes in depth on all of the actual information that you'll need. And then if you can get through the first four, the remaining are that bridge. So yeah, a lot of terminology and things that kind of just make you scratch your head. But for me, a large portion of my practice has been modernizing some of the ancient traditions, the ancient ways of practicing sadhana, for example. I'm glad that you picked up this book. It's one that for me was a wonderful starting point for the subject.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I mean, I think Paul Chek must have mentioned it, and I've listened to him and a few in his community, and then I just got drawn to that title and just took a punt. I don't tend to overthink things that just like my guests, that I just get drawn to, and I'm like, boom, let's try and make it happen. And books are similar. I hear them mentioned, whether I'm in that right place at that time to hear it in the right moment, and then I just take a punt, and then I'm reading that alongside others, and it's just, yeah, I just let that kind of flow.
Oh yeah, this author in particular is also very interesting. He's one of those guys that did horrible in school. You know, he was kicked out often. He didn't graduate, but then he goes on to dive into subjects that, you know, his teachers could not even comprehend. I love stories like this.
One of the best thinkers, I believe, had some trouble fitting in, or
Of course, most of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's paint a bit of a backdrop then for the listeners, even for myself. I'd love to hear kind of how, and go into as much detail as you're comfortable with. You know, you going into adolescence and what that was like, because I know a bit about this just from you know, paying attention to what you're putting out there. So yeah, it'd be good to just get a bit of a feel for what made you this Daniel Rama who is today, and what your kind of growing up was like, I guess, coming out of Canada.
Sure, there are almost two clearly different lives in this current one. Who I was before the age of 19 and who I'm becoming after that period. And prior to, I had, you know, issues with my parents, issues with my family, with my friends, with myself was probably the biggest thing. I wasn't necessarily, I mean, I always had a smile on my face, but I was just self-destructive in certain areas of my life. It started, you know, early teens, where I kind of became this rebellious guy. We call him Dan. And slowly, I started to feel a little bit empty on the inside. You know, throughout high school, it was just a lot of partying, staying awake for days, you know, losing my mind in so many different scenarios. And slowly, this craving for something more started to develop deep inside me. And the problem was that I was so heavily entangled in the life that I had been leading up until that point that even though I wanted to make some changes in my life, I didn't have the strength, flat out. It took a period of painful shattering, what I call the at first unfortunate events. There were three of them that took place in a rapid succession that essentially forced me into a bit of a cave, a bit of a cocoon, where I was no longer in touch with the people that I once knew. I was in a place that was new and different. I lost my ability to drive and walk, even for that matter. So I was basically forced to be alone with myself for an extended period of time. And during this time, I was recovering from an injury that I mentioned. It left me without the ability to locomote and get around on my own. And essentially, for a while, I was quite depressed. I was unhappy. Prior to this, I was curious about fitness and I wanted to become a personal trainer. I had this injury that was essentially stealing my ability to do that. So I was looking at my life and my potential prospects and feeling like there's not much that I would be able to do. But at some point, a shift started to take place where I said, you know, I might not be able to run again or do stressful movement patterns with the legs, but I can still improve. And I think I can still be of value to someone else. And as soon as I made that decision, things just started to align. My father, who I hadn't been speaking with for a little while, he kind of reconnected with me and introduced me to certain practices that fall within the realm of yoga: mindfulness, meditation, pranayama, proper exercise. And because I was alone, because, you know, certain things had happened to me that cut through all of the fluff of daily life, I was able to receive these practices, these techniques that fall within the realm of yoga in a wholehearted way and practice them super, super sincerely. And I started to find rapid improvement. This was, you know, at a point in my life where doctors told me I'd never be able to run again. And in less than 12 months of adopting these things, I ran a 5K myself. So I started to see rapid improvements, not only within the realm of body, but with mind, with emotions, with my energies on any given basis. And once I'd experienced that profound healing power, you know, what these techniques were able to do for me, I saw that as my life's purpose. You know, there's nothing else that we're going to do. Now, the only thing is, how can I change myself? How can I make myself in such a way that I'm in the best possible position to share this information that has been so beneficial for me? So after that period, I ended up moving to an ashram. I was only going to this place, this spiritual community, for 1 month to take their yoga teacher training. I ended up staying there for almost 2 years, just because this yoga teacher training, it peeled back so many layers and it allowed me to see my own inner demons, in a sense. And once I saw them, I didn't want to leave until I had a better grasp, a better understanding of how to work with my demons. So this place, it was instrumental. I almost think of this place, Sivananda Ashram, like my own spiritual kindergarten. And after that period, you know, the rest is history. I started traveling around the world teaching yoga, shifted to online programs, even pre-COVID. Together with my partner, we're running yoga teacher trainings, retreats, all sorts of international workshops. So I think in a nutshell, that's been my journey towards here and now.
Nice. I mean, it resonates quite a lot. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the podcast, because my journey as well, like I've had, you know, I'd say late teens, early 20s, there was periods of my life where I'd hit rock bottom. I was partying a lot. There was drugs involved. There was alcohol way before that. And it just got me into situations where it was more like a train wreck. You know, it was like I didn't see it coming. And by the time I pumped the brakes, it was too late and it all just compounded. Right. And then you're like, oh dear, it's too much. And then the emotions come in and you really suddenly realize, like there was those moments where I realized it's just, you know, there has to be a change, or like it's kind of, you can kind of see what the future is going to be like just based on what's here and now. And yeah, and that depression crept in for me, and it's what caused me to make big changes. And then it often gets me thinking, like, do we have to experience that moment to then really know what the other side's like? and what we want to avoid and want to heal from, and want to try and help others not get to that point, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's amazing to hear you talk about that, and seeing where you're at now, and what you're doing, and I know being of service is like such a big thing for you. And do you think that's in relation to kind of the hard times you've had, and because of that, or is it just because you have found yourself and you know yourself? Because that's the first point, like, know thyself. That's a big thing for me. Like, I think without a doubt that's the overguiding the mission over here. It's like it's guiding everything. Know thyself, know thyself. And within that, like, when I come into conflict, or when I have an argument, or when I have confusion or stuck points, it's just like, well, I don't know myself, because I'm having these experiences because I don't know myself enough. So I just need to go deeper and understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's been valuable not only to know myself, but to create a little bit of separation between those things which we typically think are me, but in truth, they're something else. So this has been a big part of my sadhana, is just creating a little bit of separation between what is this body, what is truly me, what are these thoughts and these feelings, and what is truly me. And when we have that space, we are less heavily identified with the comings and goings of life, because honestly, there will always be bullshits. And speaking, from a perspective of someone who's been addicted to all sorts of things, those cravings are never going to go away. They're always really part of you. But if you can just see that they're not really you, they're just something that comes and goes and you experience, but it's not truly you. And when you get that, then, you can, it's like the expression, the pot watcher never boils. It's like, all too often we think that we're this water, we think that we're the boiling pot, but in truth, we're just the one that's watching it boil. And when you get to that perspective, whatever happens in your life, you're pretty well untouchable. And I started to notice that, furthermore, if you start to talk about happiness, that I was never really truly happy if I was only thinking about myself, my little individual self. I noticed early on that when I was at my best, feeling the best, most joyful, most outgoing, it was when I was focusing on improving someone else's day, even if it was just some random act of kindness, whatever it might be. But through that, I realized that if I want to lead a happy, meaningful life, it can't be about me. And in a sense, I see that this is not really my life, but rather it belongs to all those who might benefit through my unique skill set. And when that shift took place, service for me, it's absolutely everything. Everyone else first, me second. But at the same time, it's important to understand that in order to serve, the first person you need to serve is yourself. And that was a bit of a roller coaster for me in the beginning, where I started teaching international workshops, sometimes different countries every week. And quickly I was reaching this burnout period, getting fatigued. And so I just canceled everything for a year, moved back to the ashram to focus on myself. But present day, that roller coaster has become a little bit less intense. The ups and the downs, it's like I can serve others while still serving myself, and burnout doesn't happen. But it's been quite a journey, and still is, certainly.
Yeah, I love that kind of looking to individualism, but not to kind of categorize it or politicize it, but it's like the individual and the collective, and where those lines cross. You get into troubled water when you try and like theorize it or pull it into kind of categorize a country, for example, or culture in this way. But it really is that being fit for service and focusing on yourself. What do you think culture did play a part, of course, but how much to a point do you think culture played a part that you had to really spend time by yourself, introspecting, and what would you say, conditioning yourself back to the self almost?
Yeah, it's weird. You talked about like how to instill this change in others without them having to get to this breaking point. And for me, I'm not sure that it would have happened necessarily.
Mhm.
It was really, and still there are certain things in my life that I look to change. And there's usually this voice that kind of comes to the surface and tells you about this change, this intuitive voice that just says everything that's so true. But then another voice arises and we start to argue with it. And so it's been a little bit of an up and down of finding the willpower and determination to do things on my own. Because if I don't listen to this voice, it tends to get louder and louder and louder until there's no choice but to follow through and go with what this intuitive voice is saying. As far as culture is concerned, my external circumstance, it certainly had a big influence on my life, and it still does. My friend circle from back in the day, we're all still very close, actually. I'm currently spending time at my father's house in Ontario, and I see those guys, maybe a couple of times a month. And it's interesting because the relationship that we have, it hasn't changed at all, really. Like, we're still very tight knit. All of my friends from high school, we're still in communication with each other. But just, again, it's this distance where I'm not so entangled present day, where I can still hang out and be part of this community, but not feel like I need to adopt absolutely every little thing that they do. So yeah, my culture, grew up in a relatively middle class kind of community, a little bit whitewashed, I guess you could say. It never had a notable influence over this transitional portion of my life. If anything, if anything, it was going out and exploring other cultures that was more pivotal. So I lived for a little while in India. It was a 6-month period, getting by on like $200 over the whole period, just living very simply, traveling throughout Indonesia as well, some of the Middle East. Those moments were more transformative than, my initial 19 years staying in Southern Ontario, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. On that point about friends, I think it's it can be one of the most challenging things when you go off on your own journey, as many people do nowadays, more so than they ever have done, and then they return back. And I see it lots of places, and I talk with friends who have changed a lot and want to change more, and then they have this real resistance because they won't have things in common with their friends that they grew up with, and they value those friendships so much. Even more so, they value them now they've gone off on their journey. They value them more. However, the interactions do change. Do you find yourself like the way you speak change, or like some phrases that you use? Does that creep in?
Yeah, a little bit for sure. I mean, probably the most notable change these days is that my friends are asking yogic questions.
Yeah.
How do I increase hip mobility, reduce low back pain, think a little more clearly? So, if anything, they're coming more in my direction now, I would say.
Yeah, the purity of the questions, the connections, just over and above overrides everything. Yeah.
Yeah, we got a couple people interested in social media as well. I help them out with that a little.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Amazing. I was gonna say, my mic might sound better now. I've kind of plugged it in halfway.
There you go.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you actually. Well, actually, on staying on that point, intuition. When you talk about that voice and those perhaps two voices, like how to distinguish what those voices are, first of all, and which one to listen to is what I see and feel into. Is like so many people get stuck because they don't know which voice to listen to or how to navigate, because the mind is so busy. And you must get that a lot, of course, for people asking. And
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it really doesn't matter which voice you listen to. You know, life is it's a simple thing. It's a very short thing. You listen to one, see where it takes you. You listen to the other, you see where it takes you. A lot of my own journey has been by trial and error. You know, you can learn the easy way, you can learn the hard way. I tend towards the hard way. It sinks in a little bit more. My brother would be at the opposite end of the spectrum where he can take people's word for it, but it's just a practice. You know, you listen to this one voice, you listen to this other one, and then decide which voice creates the life that I really want to be leading, you know, because at the end of the day, it's all you. If you want to spend your life, you know, entangled in drinking, drugs, social interactions, that's totally fine. I would never tell someone that they shouldn't or couldn't do that. But there might be something a little bit higher for you, a little bit more valuable, more meaningful. And so it's just a matter of listening and observing, and then reassessing your situation as you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I often say that the only bad decision is not making one.
Yeah. And also a little bit, you know, you don't necessarily want to regret a decision. The best decision is one that you can truly follow through on and stand behind.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, and often, sometimes when you feel like you could have made a better decision, you know the result of that, let's say, quote unquote, bad decision or not so good decision. You know the result of that. So that means something to you now. It's like the rule, until you break it, you don't really know what the experience of it now. But that rule now, you know why it's there, and it means more to you that you've gone there. Yeah, which is interesting. So yeah, I think that's fair. But the simplicity, you talk about simplicity a fair bit. Is there anything that is complex for you that you try and maybe learning a new skill, maybe it's cameras or something, but the simplicity of life, does that just guide you in any direction? Is that you don't have to tell me, but the mantra that you talk of, is that the simplicity of things and you tune back into that?
I've always been a simple guy, but especially when I started to fall into the role of a yoga teacher or someone who's associated with service, simplicity is even more important for me. When I was first starting out, you know, it was like the less that I buy, the fewer expenses I have, the more accessible I can make my offerings. You know, if I can embody a simple life, then I can make the act of sharing a little bit more straightforward. And I tend to apply this simplicity concept to anything that I want to learn, whether it be an advanced, you know, physical skill like handstanding, because I think with handstand, it is a more fun thing and people want to have fun with it. But if you treat it as just a skill that you're learning, there's a very dry and basic way that's perhaps more effective. You know, you never want to lose the joy entirely, but with handstand, there's maybe only 3 exercises that you really need to focus on in order to develop. Most people will never be able to, you know, get through just 3 exercises day in and day out. And so this concept, I would apply it to any new skill that I am learning, be it photography, post-production work. The current skill is, well, not so much a skill, but an interest, is the study of mycology. I've been getting more and more into foraging and mushrooms and stuff like this. And that's a complex one, but still you can embody these, you know, just which ones have look-alike mushrooms, so you don't need something poisonous. Yeah, it's simplicity was actually the final message when I left the ashram. They would every now and again open a book at random and read whatever was on the page. And the final message that I'd received was, richness comes to those who are simple and humble. And so after leaving that place, it's been something that I've tried to embody, this concept of simplicity.
Simplicity comes to those who...
Richness comes to those who are simple and humble. Yeah.
Nice. I'm going to write that one down. Yeah, amazing. What was the ashram experience like? I think you said 2 years, but I think you were there for a whole year and then came back?
Yeah, I stayed there about 18 months, and then I left for a period of time. It was a great experience for me. As I mentioned, it's an environment which cuts through a lot of the fluff. You know, there's no TVs, there's very seldom Wi-Fi present, actually. And everyone is just there for the purpose of spiritual growth, spiritual improvement. And it was at a period in my life where I really needed that type of structure. Towards the end, it had almost gotten to the point where I was being groomed for the life of a brahmachari, which is essentially a yogic student, sometimes referred to as a celibate student also. But I was basically being groomed for life in the ashram, just that would be my life, you know what I mean? I didn't stick through with it, but the idea was that the Swami would dictate every little detail of my day, what time I was waking up, which types of sadhana I would do in the morning. Then I would go to a satsang and have a yoga class. So almost every single minute of the day was outlined for me. And moving forward after the ashram years, I've only, taken everything with a grain of salt, embodied those those pieces of routine, which really, really resonate with me. So as I mentioned, it was like spiritual kindergarten. It set the tone for my being able to reintegrate with society, but without losing the essence of that space, which was simplicity, cutting through all of the fluff, just focusing on improvement, enjoyment, and service to others.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's a space that everyone should experience at some point in time, but I also have to clarify that I pretty much wanted to leave like every week, if not every day.
Is that the resistance? How did the resistance play in then?
Yeah, it's not a comfortable thing encountering your own demons. We don't like to know, for example, that everything we have in this life, all of our happiness, all of our sadness, that's our own doing. People don't like to know that happiness is a choice. We like to think that shit is just happening to us, but it does take a certain substance in order to overcome a lot of these issues. One of which is recognizing that we're 100% responsible for our life circumstance. And without that ashram, I probably wouldn't have come to that realization so quickly anyhow. But it's truly empowering once you see that in your life. It just means, this is great. If I don't like something, I actually have the power to change it. How fantastic is that?
It's that, isn't it? It's empowering. It's overwhelming. It feels like a lot of responsibility, but then, it's not that much responsibility. You're doing it. It's happening anyway. You've been doing it all your life to a point.
No, it's just time to make that which was previously a compulsive, unconscious process, time to turn that into a conscious process.
And what about trust? Was there a lot of governing trust?
In the beginning, especially when you're performing certain esoteric practices, I should preface by saying that before the ashram, I was living a certain way. When I came to this place, I was like, what the hell are all of these people dressed up like all orange and yellow and everything and singing these crazy songs? It was a little bit strange. And with regards to certain sadhana, especially certain types of pranayama, you do need to trust your teacher, because these practices are weird and uncomfortable, and you don't really see how it might yield some benefit. And so for at least the initial period, you do need to trust the teacher, the purveyor of these practices, that this is going to be something that will be good for me. But after a certain point, when you're aware of practices, you're a little bit more critical with your thought process, then you can trust less. With all of my students, I like to tell them, please do not trust me at all. Like, you might take my word and apply some things, but everything needs to be proven in the fire of your personal experience. Otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's true. I think you said once about, I think it was relating to the books being someone else's experience, which is
Mm.
fully true, and nothing's really true until you feel it, until you experience it for yourself, which is a science. It's almost like it's one big science experiment, life. And yeah, what can we say is real? We're made up of the same things, and what we're seeing sometimes isn't necessarily happening. It's perceptions. There's lots of things that you can say is kind of a subjective truth or realness, but if you feel it, it's real for you. It's as real as this pen. It's real.
Provided you're identified with it, yeah. Some
Yeah.
things I've experienced and thought they were real, and later on realized that they were far from real. They were not so real for me. So it all has to do with, in yoga, we call it as ego or ahamkara. It's just your identification, whatever you're identified with, be it your body, your mind, the fact that you're a man, that you're a father, whatever you're identified with, your system starts to act in such a way that that identity survives and thrives, which is why it's so vastly important to check in with what we are identified with. For example, in still some parts of India, from an early age, they'll have their children repeat this certain mantra, which in translation, it would mean, I am one with the cosmos. It's to try to establish a cosmic identity, an all-inclusive identity from the very beginning. Because if you can be inclusive in who you think you are, if you see yourself as part of everyone and everything, then that's the end of suffering. That's the end of conflict. But if you think that you're something other than what you truly are, you're always going to suffer in some way, shape, or form. So checking in with our identities, it's simple practice of journaling, seeing in your life who or what you think you are, and then peeling away those layers. For me, it's been instrumental in moving from who I was to who I'm becoming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And although we have been talking about yoga this whole time, can we enter with some definitions, perhaps, for those who don't really know what and I love you because of your perspective on what yoga means. So yeah, could you just define yoga first of all?
Sure. So the classic definition is union. Yoga means union. And more so, it relates to the process of realizing that we are, in fact, already united. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is yoga is the process of uniting one's lower self with higher self. But in truth, we are already that higher self. This is not some journey that needs to be walked, with time and effort. It's more so we just need to let the clouds move away. We need to let the waters settle so that we can see that which we truly are. And so in a sense, yoga is all about the elevation of perception. It's all about learning to see life and yourself the way that it truly is, as opposed to seeing through the lens of memory or seeing the world as other people see it. Yoga is just a process of elevating body, mind, emotions, and energies in such a way that you see more clearly. And there are so many different ways to go about that process. If you want to keep it limited to the realm of yoga, we say there's proper movement. This is the asanas, proper breathing, pranayama, proper relaxation, proper diet, positive thinking, or meditation. Those two are kind of synonymous. And so of these 5 pillars, there are so many different things that one could be doing, which would walk in the direction of yoga, union of lower self with higher self. And to be honest, there are many people who are yogis who've never even heard the term or who've never classified themselves as such. It's really just anyone who wants to be a better person or wants to serve society, wants something more meaningful from themselves, their lives. This is yoga. It's not just stretching and any of these things that we see on the superficial layer. It's truly a deeper process, an internal process, and one that has profound applications in modern times, especially.
Mm-hmm. Great. I love that definition of what yoga is. Yeah, I really do, because you know it's so relevant and so broad, and that's what it kind of needs to be, relevant and broad for me, because it's so applicable to everyone. And hearing that definition, I know that that can resonate with anyone given the right time for them to hear it, you know.
Yeah. You could say it a different way as well. Like, I classify myself as a yogi, and I have all sorts of yoga mats, but most of my yoga practice, I'm never even on a yoga mat. It's not like
Hard for people to understand that. Really is hard for them to understand that.
Yeah, I made a post not too long ago on social that was talking about how some people might be doing more yoga by doing their dishes than most modern yogis are doing on their yoga mats. It's just being totally present with yourself. Even in this conversation, if right now you're only focused on my voice and the process of communicating, that's yoga. If you're thinking about dinner, other things at the same time, no longer yoga. But if you can stay focused and present, you're doing some practice.
There you go. And how did your teachings come about? Obviously, was that all within the ashram, like fundamentally, and built yourself up from there in terms of all the philosophy surrounding it?
Well, the ashram was a really good place to start teaching because students would come and go. This is a place where you can go to for what they call yoga vacation. It's exactly what it sounds like. And so new groups of people would be rolling in each week. And I was not so comfortable teaching when I first started. So this type of an environment was crucial, because if I felt like I had a poor class or something, I'd probably never see those people again in my life. So no harm there. And I had a new group next week, the following week, to hone my skills. It also pays to teach a set sequence in the beginning. So, the practice was 2 different types of breathing exercises, some sun salutations, and 12 basic postures. I would teach it that way every time with some variations. And that set structure allowed me to become really, really comfortable with that process. So teaching in the ashram was instrumental for becoming proficient in a short period of time. And then after, I brought that level of comfort and proficiency with me and started to expand upon the sequence and started to do my own things and started to pull inspiration from new communities as well. Ido Portal, for example, Wim Hof method, so many things which they don't have the term yoga, but they're all within the niche of yoga. All of these guys are also teaching yoga, as far as I'm concerned. It falls within the practice. So yeah, teaching, it was a struggle in the beginning, to be honest, but now it's something that's super fulfilling. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was similar for me. My yoga journey started with like a very disciplined, like, first of all, it made a lot of sense to me. I was craving something more emotional, more mental, to a point spiritual, not that I was aware of it at the time, but the physical side of it was kind of a byproduct of me. I was on my mat when this was all going on. Bikram for me was a way in, and I never even considered anything else because I was getting so much from this disciplined, like quite serious. I mean, that again, maybe
a little militant.
Maybe another byproduct of practicing the same thing over and over again, and being disciplined enough to like not move between postures and really pay attention to how you are feeling. Like that discipline, I was getting so much from that. And that for me kind of, I think I've still got a bit of that seriousness because I do teach yoga, and when I do, I catch myself being perhaps more serious than kind of aligns with my philosophy, I guess. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you about that seriousness that comes in, maybe, and what does that really mean, I guess, for you?
Yeah, I'm smiling right now because I'm just remembering my time in this ashram in particular. When you live in a space like that, you do have the tendency to become somewhat robotic, somewhat mechanical. And this is a shame. Our practice, we do need joy. You know, we're literally stronger, more effective at everything we do when we're in a pleasant state of mind. And there was this one lady at Sivananda, and she asked me, Om Rama, I'm just wondering, you're always smiling, but when was the last time you really laughed? And I had to think about it. Like, it had been so long since I had actually full belly just laughed. And so I actually watched like a wins versus fails video on YouTube, just in my little tent. I used to live in a tent in this place. And I just laughed my ass off for like 15 minutes. But basically, in your teaching, in your personal practice, when we are taking things more seriously, first of all, it's good because it means that you care, you know. But when you take things too seriously and you lose the joy, it's a shame. It's effectively denying the life process. You know what I mean? So yeah, getting back to joy in my personal practice, in my teaching, that was a process, let me tell you. It took maybe the entrance of my partner, Shakti, my significant other, who is the far more human side of Becoming Balance, our organization. Yeah, she definitely helps me to laugh a little more on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's good. Finding that balance.
Yeah, we need the balance.
Yeah. So you mentioned Ido put out. For me, the natural movement side of things, learning more about kind of what it means to be human and looking through like an evolutionary lens, that for me allowed me to get more playful. And I was rolling around, crawling, getting outdoors, and just not in the confined space of my mat. So that, and I, when I do teach, I really try and bring that in, just throw out something completely random that no one's expecting, that gets people just to loosen up. So yeah.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And thank God that this is happening more and more in the yoga space. Mm-hmm. It used to be that if you did something that was not a yoga asana, it was like, what are we doing this for? But these days you get spinal waves and shaking and locomotion and animal movement, so many beneficial things. But yeah, it's been a journey getting to that point for yoga as a whole. Dogmatism was a little bit rampant in the industry at a certain point in time, but thankfully now it seems like we're all learning from other people. Ido Portal, he's a big part of my classes, that entire movement of, how can we pull inspiration from the dancers, from martial artists, from so many different modalities of movement or mindfulness. That's really what makes a modern day yoga class something to have and behold, is the incorporation of new techniques.
Exactly that. And it's more relevant because of perhaps the way we're living, lifestyles, sedentary cultures. We don't have that relationship with the ground. So, yoga, from what I know, has been born from cultures which do have relationships with the floor, and we don't. Then we go into a yoga class and we're struggling to squat. Now, I went through 7 years of, my own yoga practice, and it dawned on me when the squat's a natural movement. I'm like, I can't even squat. Yeah, I've been practicing yoga for so long. What's going on?
That's funny that you say that. I definitely have a few things in my practice. Well, I should preface by saying that I learned some of the more advanced skills purely to be a hook for people's attention. Sure. People want the fancy things, but at a certain point in my practice, I started to be like, what is the functional purpose of developing a one-arm handstand? Like, how is that actually going to improve the quality of my life? And you might get things out of it, but present day, my yoga practice, every piece of it needs to make my life better. And if it doesn't, then I cut it from the equation. There are very few things that are just pleasure-based in my yoga practice these days. But we all need to find our own unique ratio of pleasure versus purpose. I'm not telling people to forego the one-arm handstand journey. It's quite something crazy, but everything needs to have a reason why we're doing it these days, at least for me.
No, yeah, I think you bang on, and where you delivered that as well. I'd like to talk to you about developing a personal practice, because again, a bit of my journey, it wasn't until I got on the mat myself outside of a yoga. I didn't even own a mat for many years. And it's hilarious because it wasn't until I did buy a mat, start doing it at home. I guess I didn't have, well, I went to Rishikesh and I did a yoga training there, not with the intention of becoming a teacher, just to really gain the confidence and I guess the experience of just being able to put together a routine without being in my head. So, there's lots more things, but generally that was one of them. And then I started to really go in and I was like, oh, wow. So that differentiation, that kind of, I guess, knowledge of what it's like to not have a personal practice and then come to a studio. For me, again, it was a bit of a disconnect there because, you breathe together or you move together. And it isn't until you step away from that do you then start to tune in even more.
Mm.
So I guess my question is, how important do you feel that personal practice is for someone who has perhaps been practicing for years in a studio with other people?
Yeah, well, the most obvious thing is that even the best in studio class is not designed for you. It's not specific to your current conditions. It's not specific to your goals, where you actually want to be. So developing the capacity for a home practice, a personal practice, is paramount. And for example, with the Becoming Balance app, our online space, it's kind of this concept of teaching a man to fish as opposed to just giving him the fish. The idea is that eventually you don't need the app. Eventually you throw us out altogether, and what you're left with is just the distilled techniques. For me, that's my version of successful service, is being of service in the initial period and then having that person elevate themselves to the point where they totally forget about you and they can just continue on with their lives. But in order to get there, we really do need to be exposed to things in an effective way. So physical classes in the studio, for me, that's not really how I started to practice. I was fortunate enough to have, my father and this ashram, and I was getting very information dense sessions, personalized sessions. I was also reading a lot of books, but effectively my personality has always been such that if there's something I need to do, it's perhaps better to walk that path alone. That's just always been my personality with regards to learning something new. But developing that capacity for self-study is so important. And I think, as you mentioned, for most people, you gain that level of comfort through what we call collective sadhana, meditating together in a group, practicing asanas together in a group. You start to become aware of your body, your mind, your emotions in a basic way. And then once you have that, foundation laid, you need to find ways to make it work on your own. And there are so many different things that we could discuss within this realm. Like you mentioned, how do I design a sequence, that's relevant and suitable for my personal practice? For me, it's why the set sequence again was super important from Sivananda, because I didn't have to think about what I was going to do. So every day my personal practice looked the same. For at least a year, it looked the exact same. And once I got really, really comfortable with that sequence, both in terms of teaching, but also in terms of practicing myself, then I started to extrapolate. I started to pick and choose different things. And now I've distilled what was once 90 minutes to 2 hours down into 10, 15, 20 minutes in the morning of just the big bang exercises that I know I really, really need to do if I'm going to be able to do the things that I want to do. You know what I mean? And we will never really get there only with in-studio classes. You'll never get there by following someone else. This is, I think, another big takeaway from me is that, I love not necessarily books that are about a subject, but autobiographies about a person who's walked a certain path. And what I tend to see is that these great beings, really, they didn't listen to anyone. They didn't follow any system of thoughts. They might have started somewhere or found inspiration from something, but at the end of the day, they carved their own path. And so I see that as being something so valuable. When we know ourselves and what we truly want, everything becomes just far more efficient, what you need to do on any day-to-day basis. So yeah, shifting away from in-studio classes, or not away from, but just supplementing them with some basic home practice. It's the kind of thing that anything new is going to be uncomfortable in the beginning. There's always going to be the chance of falling back or relapsing or whatever. It's not until we feel the benefit firsthand. Like I mentioned before, first there's a period of trust. You have to trust that when we're saying personal practice will be good for you, develop that ability. If you get beyond that by just trusting that it will be good for you, then you feel the benefit for yourself and you no longer need to trust because now you have personal experience, you have firsthand experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think technology can really aid that by having a video on in the background, your app, there you go. And going off on a tangent, going off piste for a moment, or pausing it whilst you fit something else in, and just using it to bounce. It's almost like bouncing ideas off a friend, or you know, using it in a unique way like that can really help.
Absolutely. That's one of the benefits of technology.
Mm-hmm.
It's got pros and cons, this tech world.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, amazing. I did want to talk to you about, and this is, I'm going to shoot from the hip, a notion of free will, because I know I can ask you anything and you're going to, you know, give me something back because you know yourself. What do you feel about free will? Do you feel, because I was listening to a podcast the other day and it was so convincing that the notion of free will is just not true. So I thought I'd get your ideas on this.
Sure. Well, how about I'll talk about it from a yogic perspective.
That'll be great.
Within the realm of karma, which karma is basically a word in Sanskrit which relates to action, but also experiencing the results of action. Both of these are karma. And so we have a certain karmic purpose for this life. There's a reason why we were born.
Mm-hmm.
I could answer this question in a nutshell and just say it's somewhere in the middle. It's not that you have no free will. It's not that the only thing you have is free will. It's somewhere in the middle. All of us were born under unique circumstance, and there is a reason why we are alive. Where we will go, it is dependent on purushartha, or self-effort. Right? We need to definitely apply ourselves. Free will does come into play. I mean, even just from a standpoint of pure concepts, you know, like these are concepts that we use to better understand life. And the idea with this type of a concept is that, is it empowering you or is it the opposite? If you feel in your life that you have no free will, whether or not that's true, it sucks. It's a horrible thing. So, you know, we could debate the subject all day, but for me anyhow, it's like, do you want to be in control of your life or not in control of your life? Do you want to have a say in where you go, or do you believe that you have no say at all? So even just from that alone, I would prefer to retain some degree of control over my life. I would like to believe that free will exists, but at the same time, as I mentioned, there is a direction that we were born with the potential to go. So it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it's almost like a grumpy old man's idea that is essentially quite a dangerous idea. That's all it is. It's like an idea. It's to a point so irrelevant. And I'm listening to an audiobook at the moment. I mentioned on the last podcast, but it's beautiful. He sets the book up with the placebo and the nocebo, but let's relate it to just currently your day-to-day goings on. Like, you have such influence in how the thing you're experiencing feels to you, or what it means. Like if you want it to mean nothing, then think it means nothing. It's like that you believe in it so much, then it will be so. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's always about the way that we see the world, ourselves, or a situation. You know, these things, they have no tangible positives or negatives in and of themselves. It's always going to be what we make of that particular situation.
Mm-hmm. How do you find yourself perhaps judging? Because I'm definitely, feeling into what this means to me, of like judging things good and bad, and categorizing like higher, lower vibrations, and putting this kind of.
Sure. Well, let's say it this way. So there's a simple analogy. You'd say, day-to-day basis, what are you going to do? The idiots in this world spend their days doing things they hate, things they don't enjoy. The most intelligent spend their days doing things that they do enjoy. The absolute genius does only what's needed. So the idea is that there's a progression. We start out in this untrained state where so many things, dislike, dislike, dislike. It's not working for me. I hate this. Eventually, as we get a little bit more intelligent, we start to pursue our passions, the things that really bring us joy. Then we start to like things. I like this. I like that. We continue to pursue them. But then after a certain point, we realize that even the things that we like, there's still something to be desired. It's still not quite complete. Eventually, at least again within yogic terminology, the idea is to see the world not through the lens of likes and dislikes. If I could say that another way, half of the shit that I do in any given day, if this life was just mine, there's no way I would do half of that shit. I would be just like in a cave in the forest somewhere, not caring about anyone or anything. That would be my ideal. You know what I mean? But I'm trying not to follow exclusively the path of likes or dislikes. I'm trying more so to shift into this middle perspective where we have a more, we see things with a little equanimity is the idea. You know what I mean? And when that happens, you're a little bit more free. You're no longer running away from things you dislike. You're no longer stuck running towards only the things that you do like. You're free to experience life just as it is, which is a truly beautiful thing, actually. If you can see other people, not as things to like or dislike, but just as people, who they truly are, what does that experience of life look like for you?
Yeah. And just meeting that in a very like experimentative way. So what would it be to go about an experience and then not have any, separation from like liking it or not, and just seeing for what it is. It's like that. I don't know, if you have an object and you take away, if it was an alien object, tune into the senses. How's it smell, look, feel? Are all these things really a good or bad, or is that a concept that's been perhaps conditioned from a real young age? Do you like this? Do you like that? Do you want this?
Well, that's the funny thing, is that people will like or dislike different things. You know what I mean? So the example of a bee, if somebody sees a bee based on their past experiences, maybe they look at it in fear. They are allergic to bees or something, whatever. Maybe they look at it and be like, oh, wow, a beautiful pollinator. You know what I mean? So two people, the exact same stimuli, totally different experience based on whether they like it or they dislike it. The next step above and beyond those two would then be just to see it as a bee. It's not a thing to like or dislike. It's just what it truly is. And there's a certain sense of blissfulness that comes when you see things as they are, not as you remember them to be or not as you think them to be, just as they are. It's truly beautiful.
Yeah, nice. Okay, one more random one, because
Yeah.
things are just coming to me, and I'm like, all right, I gotta ask this guy this. So, because obviously you run your own business,
Mm-hmm.
how do you navigate being present? And it it can be an obvious answer. Being present and then planning for the future, and it's this interesting modern, well, civilized situation we've got to be present with what is today, and then also plan for the future and look forward to things.
Yeah, I love the question. In response, I mean, they're kind of one and the same. Future is not even a thing that really exists. It's a result of how you are in this moment. You know what I mean? So this moment is the most important thing, first and foremost.
Yeah.
With regards to my business, how I stay on top of things, how I generate ideas for a piece of content or a new business endeavor, something like that, it stems from the present moment. So, for example, carrying a simple field journal, I like to stay analog and write things down with a pad of, pen and paper. Any ideas that I have, whether I'm just waking up from a dream or I'm driving or like any point in time where some inspiration strikes, I find a way to take that down. Just take a very simple note, which doesn't necessarily pull me away from the present moment. It's just essentially saying to myself, this is something that I want to go back into, when I have time a little bit later on. So simple tools like that, with regards to staying present, it is a big issue that I have had in my personal practice. As teachers, we have this tendency to go through our personal practice, but almost with this idea of how do I relay this information to other people. So let's say you're sitting down for your seated sadhana and you're actually having a very beautiful meditation. You're, finally getting to a point where the mind is a little bit more calm, a little bit more clear, where you see that there's perhaps even this union of you as the knower, the thing you're knowing. There's this unity taking place. But then a thought arises, how could I share this with others? And as soon as that thought arises, it detracts from your experience. Another example would be in my personal practice, like if I just went on a long hike and I want to do some asanas or something to rest and relax, because I have this big social media following, my mind will naturally just chime in and say, oh, you should set up a camera so that you could use this later on, but it does take away from your personal practice at some point. So it's, again, a balancing act, finding ways to, still create content and serve others in this fashion, but without making it a big, excessively involved ordeal, which, full transparency, I have had that habit in the past of neglecting myself for sake of the other. And it doesn't really work, because just the quality of what you put out becomes less than. So finding ways to just stay present and deal with that type of service and everything a little bit later on. It's a battle, and the process is certainly going to be unique to each individual. But yeah, I found little notes helpful. Sometimes I'll even have like cameras just set up. Like I might even leave this camera here and, just forget about it and do something a little bit later on. So it's like, I try to keep the creative process to a minimum. And it's, again, a big thing with my partner, Shakti, is I would spend hours just like arranging our apartment for filming new classes for the Becoming Balanced app. It's like, okay, this is a new video. I have to put this plant over here and over here. And she's like, why the hell are you doing that? Like, do you really think people are going to care about the location of our plants, like in this video? I'm a perfectionist, so I always want to do the best possible job. Whereas my partner, she's like, it's about the content. It's about the subject matter itself. So her videos is like all homemade, shot, iPhone, nothing in the background. But the interesting thing is that her engagement will be way higher than mine, where I've curated every little piece of this content, for example. And so, yeah, I'm learning from her that it doesn't need to be a well manicured aesthetic environment. You just need to condense things a little bit down to what it is that you're really trying to say, either when you're talking to your students or sharing a piece of content. Simplicity, again.
Yeah, yeah, simplicity. And I sometimes feel when, I mean, you might get this when you really try and perfect, as you mentioned, perfect something, it takes the human aspects away, and it's
Mm,
pristine, or it's really clean, or artificial. That can kind of leak into it, and you're like, okay, step back. What is making this pure, which is my human experience, kind of like getting that across. But it's a constant fluctuation and navigation, because so you're creating something which kind of isn't necessarily like, what's the word, it's not like a natural thing. It's to a
right.
point like artificial, or technological. But yeah, I liked what you said about the present moment and stuff. Like I've sat to for Passanas, and that they unlocked big things for me about the present moment just really being all there is. Like, everyone can say it, the present is all you've got. But when you really get that on a deep level, it's like, okay, it just, that's it. It's all you've got. You have nothing else. You've only got right now. If you're constantly living somewhere else, then good God, you're going to have a suffer. You're going to suffer.
No, truly. Yeah, that's the funny thing about the present moment is suffering cannot exist in the present moment. If you're truly just right here and right now,
Mhm.
everything is cool. I mean, by definition, if you're listening to this, everything is cool. You're not, going to be eaten or anything like that. It's only when you jump away to the future or you jump away to the past that you start to have some problems in your life. So the more that we can be centered and focused, that will only lead to a better future. If you're thinking constantly about the future, you might end up actually distorting, perverting that future potential. Whereas if you're just with yourself here and now, you might create something wonderful. It's
Yeah.
kind of funny for me. I learned this in college, university. The best way to study was just to shut the hell up and sit quietly for a while. Like, we have all of the tools, we have all of the answers, all of the information buried deep down somewhere inside. And we just need to be quiet enough, present enough for that knowledge to come to the surface.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, man. I think that's a lovely place to conclude.
Mm.
Because it really is. It really is the truth. And there's lots I could say, but I just want people to just hear that, and to tune in wherever they are right now. Close your eyes as long as you're not driving, and just tune in and listen, and be, and just feel. And I think yoga teachers specifically, for me, when I've always been taught, they've had a way of really putting that at the center of a practice, without saying it, without saying be present. It's more of like the way in which they would guide you to back to yourself, back to this moment, back to how you feel, developing that relationship with how you feel right now, because that's hard to do for some people.
It can be. Yeah. When we're so heavily identified with, again, things that are not truly us, the natural inclination is you want to escape the present moment because you feel that the present moment is painful or unfortunate, you know? But it's just a perverse way of seeing the present moment. And that perversion comes from these false identities, believing that we're something other than who or what we truly are. So, yeah, go to your yoga class, do some breathing exercises, learn from great teachers, read a book about wonderful people. Whatever it is that helps you see more clearly, it's just here and now.
Yeah, lovely. That's a great message. Is there anything else you wanted to say to anyone listening, or to find you anywhere? Or they'll find
Just
you.
be good, do good. Those 4 words. If you want to find me, Instagram, Daniel Rama, danielrama.com. Send me an email, info@danielrama. And if you want some, educational resources, anything along those lines to help you become more well-versed within the science of yoga, movement, mindfulness, becomingbalance.app or Becoming Balance, search it in the iPhone App Store, Google Play Store. Yeah, I love to have interactions with people. I'm one of those guys that's like, I have set times of day for Instagram direct messages and all of that. So even though it's a big account, I never let things pile up. I always get around to people. I'm happy to have some interactions with real humans. And thank you, Chris, for having me on this show. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, it's been fun, man. And if you're watching, I don't think you'd think that we're in different places because our cameras are so good. It's like we're next to each other.
I love it, bro. Yeah, I wish I was there, you know, doing so many online things, but you got to really.
Have you ever been to England?
No, I haven't. I actually had plans and they were canceled, pandemic reasons, of course. So not yet, but at some point.
Yeah, well, come say hey. Definitely,
I'd love to.
definitely be up for that in person, or I'll come say hey. You've traveled a long
Sounds
way.
good,
I'll come to you when you're here.
Yeah, you're always welcome, but yeah, sounds good.
Amazing. Thanks, bro.